Okay, let me just adjust one more thing in the streaming and we should be ready to go. Um, Thanks everyone for joining and watching this stream. In this stream, I will talk about finalRender free and finalRender and how we use IES lights and set up interior scenes and some really crazy setups with materials as well. Um, First of all, let me explain a little bit what finalRender Free is. I don't know if you already saw our announcement. We have a finalRender Free version that is for you. You can download it. It's totally free. It has all the functions and features of finalRender. The only thing we restrict in the free version is that you can't have the true hybrid experience, which means you either render on the GPU or you render on the CPU, but not both. If you like our version, if you like finalRender free, we encourage you to get the full version, the subscription. It's really affordable, and then you can enjoy the true hybrid and also network rendering and animations and all this stuff. Okay, let's dive right into it, and we can see what we can do. Oh, let me just move in here. So here we have kind of a, I call this scene stress test for IES lights. So we have several IES lights here in this room, as you can see there. These are all the IES lights, and I created or used these IES lights. Here we can see the shape or form of the IES data with our finalRender area lights. And there's one important thing with finalRender. You can use standard 3D Studio Max IES lights, so they will work, no problem at all. You can use the standard IES lights. I avoid them really like anything I can avoid actually, because the standard IES lights there have some legacy and stupid settings and behaviors that are non-predictable. So we always suggest use the finalRender IES lights. So in this scene we have these IES lights spread in this room. It's a simple box with a reflective floor and pretty simple walls bouncing light around. So that's usually a pretty extreme situation for a global illumination because we have a lot of light bouncing going on. So I would suggest maybe we have a look at the scene and what we can do here. Let me switch to our ActiveShade rendering mode. And we have two options. I'm using 2020 right now. So we could use ActiveShade, and I'll press the render button now. And the ActiveShade will show up and we will get the rendering here. Another option here we have for ActiveShade would be just go in here and use the ActiveShade view in the 3D Studio Max viewport. So whatever you prefer. Sometimes I don't like it because when you select objects, it's fine when you're modeling and adjusting stuff, then it's fine, but I don't like it when you click objects. Sometimes they show up and or you deselect objects and all this kind of things. So I'd rather not have that for this session right now. Let me bring up rendering. So let's see what I'm talking about. I'll turn off the global illumination. So that would be the typical rendering you would get with a direct rendering or non-global illumination renderer. So you only see the direct lights, no light bouncing around. So now you might ask, oh, why does it look so grainy? Because that's direct only. But we have an option here, progressive light sample, and that's a very important option, and you might want to check it in from time to time. By default we have this on. This is to give you a fast feedback. So when I turn this off, you will see instantly that the grain is gone. So with the progressive light sampling off, we don't get this much grain. This is because now every light is fully sampled and sent to the renderer. However, depending on the amount of lights, it can take much longer to see your initial picture or image, but it's a matter of taste. So there you see how it gets in, and if we do the progressive light sampling off, it just takes a little bit longer until the passes come in. Because the scene is pretty simple and easy, it does not matter a lot in that situation here. Let me just see what settings we had here in our renderer. So I'm just going to our production rendering mode so that we can see we have progressive light samples and path trace turned on. Okay, that's totally fine. Let me just... And by the way, we can transfer all the settings from the production renderer over to the ActiveShade renderer. And then when we start our ActiveShade rendering again, we will get the exact settings from our production renderer in here. So that's again with global illumination on. Let me just turn off global illumination. So now we only get the direct light pass with the noise, and when we turn off progressive light sampling, we get the full clean image here. There's a let's turn on global illumination. So now I'm back to global illumination and progressive light sampling. So with global illumination, we get the bounce light everywhere, and our room really lights up and illuminates. And now when I use that with progressive lights, we can see now it takes longer. That's what I was talking about. In the direct light mode, it didn't really affect us that much, but with more bounces going on and indirect light, it might take a little bit longer. But it's pretty doable right now, so we can see the nice illumination here. Another option I want to explore is, let me just turn on the progressive light. So I want to have the noise or grain, or however you want to call this pixelated view. We have an option in our renderer where I need to go to our production render mode, because we can't set that in the ActiveShade, because usually we don't want to have that in the ActiveShade. It's called the Lightcache, where we have a biased mode. So this is our biased mode in the path tracing. So it's path tracing is usually unbiased, but we added this mode where we create a Lightcache up front, and then we render with the Lightcache. So the Lightcache on its own helps a lot in reducing transfer from production. So I'm just getting the ActiveShade settings, and now with the new ActiveShade settings we should see. I don't know if we can transfer the Lightcache function. It doesn't look like it. So for that we are just going back so that I can show you the difference to the production rendering mode, because some of the settings we don't apply in the ActiveShade. So let me just do a rendering with path tracing. So I restricted here the amount of time we spend for rendering. So I put it to 20 seconds right now. And this is just to give you an idea or impression about that I take the same time so that we can compare the image taking 20 seconds with the image also taking 20 seconds, but we change something in the settings. So I just change to Lightcache and render again. And this is what I said. This image will render the same amount of time. So now we can compare what do you get in the same amount of time. So is this more smooth? Is it the same grain level? How much difference do we see? And we can see for the same amount of time we render here with the Lightcache, we get a much smoother result. Yes, the illumination levels are a little bit different, but we can work on that. Recommend using a physical camera all the time. With the physical camera in here, we can adjust all the parameters like in a real world camera. So we have the f-stop here, we have the shutter here, shutter speed, and the ISO value. So we can adjust all the real world parameters here in real time with our physical camera. And you should always use the physical camera to create these setups and create your viewports or renderings. And as I mentioned here before, we can just let me go back. That's the setting for the without global illumination, and that's with global illumination where we see that the light is bouncing around. So we see the lights, but we don't see the reflection of the lights. When we now look at our illumination here, and we have several settings in our finalRender IES lights, including the shape of the light and if the lights are visible or not. Let me just turn on the visibility of the lights, and you will see that our lights are showing up as these little dots or bright areas, and still we can't see a real nice reflection down here. We could now, let me just go here, make the area of our disk a little bit larger. So we fill, let's say we fill our light fitting here or light casing here completely with the disk. And when we render now, we will see that we have a huge light area, which would kind of be the realistic effect we are after. So let me just turn off the visibility. And it takes a little bit for the setup because we have a lot of lights, and when we change or add geometry, we need to transfer the geometry to the graphics card and all this. So what we can see here now is that we have the full disk here. However, it would not be a good idea to have these large areas because that would not be the IES result we have. We should have the radius or diameter of IES light, and we still don't see the reflection on the floor. So let me just turn that on again, and we go here. And now to see our light source in the mirror, I'll turn on the specular effect surface, specular option, and that will update hopefully in a second our specular renderings, and we finally start to see the reflection here in the floor. So here we can see now the lights reflecting because now we have a nice big area. However, this is kind of a tough task for our global illumination because it needs to see the tiny little circles and lights, and yeah, it creates a little bit of grain, and our floor is also blurry as well. So now the question is, how can I get the reflection on the floor stronger? Usually I would need to increase the intensity of the light. So we would just, let me just double the intensity of the light. The main issue I would see here is that by doubling the intensity, everything else gets brighter again. As we can see here, everything else gets brighter. And that's usually not the intention I want, and still my reflection isn't really bright enough. So how do you solve these kind of issues? And as I said, by making the disk that large, we are disturbing or creating a wrong illumination, because the correct area of the light is much, much smaller, as we can see in our IES display here. So what we need to achieve is actually we need to get rid of the connection between the lights and the reflections. So I don't want that. So in this case, we turn off in the light the specular, so the area is not visible in reflections. And let me just zoom in here. We are going to make the disk smaller. Here we go. And we're going to make the disk the actual size of our area light we have here. So that's actually the area of the light bulb, I would say, that's in there in the spot. So let's just check this again and see what's going on. So I still have light visible on, so this is why we see these little glowing light bulbs. We want to get rid of that as well, because I don't want to see the light. I just want the illumination. So what I did right now, I turned off the light, and now we just have black in there. But we get the proper illumination here in finalRender. So what we are going to do now is we want to get our reflection back, and we want to get independent control of the reflection of the light from the illumination energy or power of the illumination. Because I kind of like this illumination with the 1100 lumen. That's kind of a realistic illumination, I think. So what I want to do now is we are going into material editor, and what's black right now is our finalRender physical material. So we have the diffuse level to 0, because I just want to have a bright spot there, or a bright area, and this bright area should just be used as a little fake that I can control the reflections and what the camera sees. So what I'm going to do is in self-illumination glow, I just turn on self-illumination, and you see instantly we get our reflections back down here. And if we were to use the same power like the light sources, we can see the problem we have here. So they become kind of a dark gray, and our reflection disappears. So we definitely want to power this up. So what I'm doing is I give it a little bit of an artificial power up for the reflections here. And if we are brave, we can even power this up much brighter. So now I can model or adjust the reflections to my liking. So I artificially powered up the areas up here. For the camera view, for what the camera sees, it's bright white. That's the maximum the camera can see. But in the reflection, I can overpower it so the reflections appear brighter than they would usually appear in a realistic environment. And if I don't want to have that, if I just want to have the self-illumination, I can turn off visible in reflections, and I can go back to the support for the specular reflections from the light source itself. So now I would get the specular reflections from our light, and as you can see, they are not really visible or strong at all. I would need to overpower the light really strong. So I'll just turn that off and go back to our visible in reflection in the material. So that's a really nice thing you should plan or think of when you set up your scenes with finalRender, or any scene with any renderer. That does not only apply to finalRender. I'm pretty sure other renderers also offer you to have self-illuminated materials and all this kind of things. So if you want to have this situation, I think that's a pretty optimized situation. And there's also the worst case scenario. Let me just turn off the light. So right now we have no light sources at all. So I turned off the light. We get our blurry reflections on the floor. And once more, I can turn these reflections on. So now I only have the self-illumination from our lights up here. I can turn back on the reflections, the blurry reflections down here. And in addition, I could do something else. I can turn on illuminate the scene with my self-illuminated areas, or yeah, areas in the scene. That works like kind of the finalRender light material. But you can see that's the toughest of all global illumination tasks, and that has nothing to do right now with IES lights, because that's just pure area light sampling, rays bouncing around, hitting the bright spot, creating illumination, bouncing again multiple times, and trying to hit by accident, by random, the spotlight. So that's the most inefficient way, but it sometimes it also can create, when they are big, large enough, these self-illuminated objects, it can create really interesting effects. So let me turn on our real IES lights. And for IES lights, as I mentioned all the time, this little shape directly comes from a light web. So I'm just loading here a light web, and I'm using the standard light webs that are available in 3D Studio Max. Right now I use the I don't know what is it, the medium, but we can also use another IES light, and that will give us this kind of shape. Creates a total different light distribution in our scene. Or we just go into our point recessed 250 watts. That should give us a much brighter look in the scene, and that happens. So now we get a much brighter light in the scene. So it is actually that easy to work with IES lights in finalRender. And we have, what's this linear pendant light? So that is that's just more a roundish light source here that looks like a pendant light. Yeah. So nothing easier than that, working with finalRender IES lights, and especially when you use our finalRender area lights. You just read in your photometric web, and you can illuminate your scene in here. Really nice and really fast and efficient with finalRender. So I think I managed to discuss all kinds of variations we have here. Let me just summarize once more what we just had here or learned here. So what we did here is we create these bright areas from our light with our material here. So when I turn that off, we see the material goes black. So we use the self-illumination with a specific energy, where we can dial in the amount of self-illumination, and this also controls our reflections down here. And this gives us control over reflections, and we can make them as strong as we want. So the other option is we don't use this material, and we could go into our light, and we just use, let me turn that on again, we use the light itself. We can make the light source visible. However, with these little spots we won't get any reflections or specular. Let me turn on this specular. So getting the reflections down here would be really tough task to get. And we have the connection, then we would have to increase the energy to see the reflections down here, and that would brighten up the room, so we will end up in a circle that we don't want. So the best and full control is we turn off the visibility of our area light, and go into the self-illumination light, and then we have the scene as we want it. For the render settings, let me just go back to our render settings. I'll go to the production rendering mode. We have various options where we can choose between path tracing and Lightcache. So right now I'll have it set to the worst situation or worst setup where we have a lot of grain, and that is with path tracing. So that's the most realistic, accurate, photorealistic mode, path tracing, but we need a lot of passes to get this clean. Or one option to get a cleaner result, but with more longer times to update between passes, is when we do the progressive light sampling. Turn that off, then we get a much cleaner image, but each pass will take longer, so that if you have the same amount of passes, it will take longer to render. However, the result will be smoother because every light is sampled through completely and bounced around, and that would give us a much cleaner result. And usually the time to get the same smoothness between path tracing and when you turn off progressive light sampling is about the same. So you would just need, in progressive light sampling, you would just need more samples. So just try that, go to 500 or something, and then you would see the updates coming in. As you can see here, the passes are very fast to render, but you just need to render longer to get it smoothed out and a clean result. One other way to optimize, let me just turn that back to 100, to optimize the quality for interior scenes. This is mainly useful when you have interior scenes. That's 1000. For interior scenes, the Lightcache, the biased rendering approach with a GPU and CPU for biased rendering, is a good compromise. It gives you smooth results much faster, and it allows you to just get, for interior scenes, much faster to the smoother result. So that was the short live stream I wanted to have with you here, showing our finalRender and finalRender free handling or working with IES lights. I will record, or will be recorded, and we will release this video as well as a little tutorial video on our Vimeo channel, so that you can watch it as often as you want and see if I did something too fast. You can check back later and see how I did the setups and what's going on here. I hope you enjoyed this little one, and I will continue to just make these little tutorials where we go into lights and materials and just specific features, and hopefully I will do later on a much more complex video as well. Enjoy your day and stay safe. Goodbye.